ever get that feeling, like with someone you were once close to, a friend maybe, or a colleague, like you've drifted apart?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know, have you ever seen one of those plants that someone's just completely forgotten about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into these sort of neglected relationships.
Okay.
We're calling them derelict relationships. And I know that word sounds kind of harsh.
Right.
But think of derelict like something that's just been left behind, abandoned,
I see where you're going with this.
So we're going to look at what happens when these connections, these relationships just kind of wither.
Okay.
And using some of the ideas from the source material we have for today, we'll look at the different ways we can think about this whole thing.
Right.
So it seems like there are two paths you can take, right? You can either try to revive things, maybe bring them back to life, or you can just let them fade away.
That's true. And our source material really digs into this whole idea of letting a relationship just sit and possibly die.
Mm-hmm.
It actually even mentions ghosting culture, like just cutting off contact without any explanation. And the source actually kind of frames it as a way to move on without all the drama.
That's interesting. Makes you wonder, though, is that always the healthiest way to go about it, even if it seems easier at the time?
It's a good question. And the source does touch on that, It points out that if you're already barely interacting with someone,
right,
it might not feel like that big of a deal to just let things be. No big announcements, no final goodbyes. Everyone just moves on with their lives.
I can see that. It does sound a little cold, though, doesn't it?
Kind of, yeah. But I think the logic there is that if the connection was already pretty weak, it might not need this huge dramatic ending.
And that brings us to another interesting point the source makes, right? About how to actually evaluate these situations.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a self-check kind of thing. Ask yourself if putting energy into reviving this connection feels right, if it feels worth it to you. And if it does, well, the source uses this really great metaphor, water that plant.
Love that.
But if you've done that check and it just doesn't feel right, or you get the sense that it's just naturally run its course, the advice is to let go. You learn what you can from the experience and you move on, towards other relationships.
I think what's important there is that it's not about placing blame or getting stuck in the past. It's about recognizing where things are at in the present.
Totally. And the source has this really powerful image to illustrate this. They talk about a wilted plant, all sad and droopy.
I remember that.
And it has this little speech bubble that says, water me, maybe.
It perfectly captures that feeling of uncertainty, right?
Absolutely. Because sometimes you're just not sure. Is there still something there, some hope? Is it even worth the effort to try and revive it? Or is that chapter just closed? Really makes you think about all those unspoken needs and desires we have in our relationships. Then there's this great quote by Amit Ray that the source includes. It says, "As the flower blooms in spring, compassion grows in mindfulness."
Beautiful quote.
I'm curious, what do you think about that in the context of these fading relationships?
It's really interesting. I think it subtly shifts the focus inward. It's like saying, even if a relationship is ending, there's still room for personal growth. By being mindful, by paying attention to what's happening, we can actually cultivate compassion, both for ourselves and for the other person.
Whoa.
It allows us to accept change more peacefully.
So basically what we've been exploring today are these derelict relationships, the ones that have been kind of neglected, maybe forgotten about a bit.
Right.
And we've talked about those two main paths, trying to bring them back to life or letting them fade away naturally.
Exactly.
What I really appreciate about the source is that it emphasizes self-awareness, being in tune with your own feelings, and being kind to yourself throughout the process.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it leaves us with a really important question to consider, Going back to that image of the wilted plant, what are some of the early signs that you might notice in your own interactions that could suggest neglect?
Right.
What are those little drops of water that might actually make a difference? Or, on the flip side, what are the signs that tell you it might be time to accept the change and move on?
Those are really great questions to think about.
They are.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive today. I always love chatting with you about these important topics.
Same here. I always learn something new.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll see you next time.
See you then.